So my name's Rob. I'm the Associate Professor of Anglican Studies and Formation at the Vancouver School of Theology. I'm an Anglican priest, and I've been in Canada for the last year, so fairly new still to Canada. You can tell from my accent I'm from England, and I've been a parish priest and worked in a cathedral in England before coming to Canada. So I'm responsible at VST for, in particular, Anglican students, although I also teach some classes which many people take from across the denominations. Um, what brings me joy in my ministry, anything to do with children's ministry, I really, really love anything to do with children's ministry at all. And I always say that I feel most fully alive when I'm presiding at the Eucharist. So those two things in particular bring me a huge amount of joy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob.
Hello, my name is Hyuk Cho, Associate Professor for United Church Formation and Studies. My responsibility is to work with United Church students mainly, and then also teach beyond the United Church students. So I'm teaching United Church theologies and histories, and also I'm teaching intercultural theologies, and also I'm teaching atonement theologies. So what brings me joy? To work with the young at heart. And also when the student express aha moment, that brings me joy.
Nice. Thank you, John.
And I'm Reverend Rebecca Simpson. I am a part-time professor at VST as the Denominational Formation Director for Presbyterian students. And I am spent most of my time as a small congregational minister in the Presbyterian Church. I've also been a camp director, and so I still work closely with our local summer camp, and that brings me great joy. And also, like Hyuk said, those moments of realizing a student has made a breakthrough in their discernment, and they're kind of the front row seat to witnessing their sense of call is really just such an honor.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to hear what brings you joy. It's important for us. Just moving on in terms of getting to content, I sent you an article called The DNA of a Healthy Church, and we will post a link on this video at the bottom or embedded in the video. But I just want to get your general reactions, comments to the article itself. I mean, what did you find helpful? What did you find you had questions about, or just a general kind of sense before we dive deeper into some aspects of it? And the way we will dialogue is anybody can jump in. Don't wait for your turn. Just feel free to jump in and we'll take it from there.
I'd like to share about the article. I think it's a valiant effort to try to bring some clarity and kind of gather in some different lenses through which to look at congregational vitality. I think right now the truth is that none of us have answers.
Yes.
We have a sense of a direction. We have some anchor points, right? Coming back to those anchor points of loving God with all our heart, mind, soul, loving our neighbor as ourselves, seeking to discern the steps of Jesus in front of us and where do we go. But you know, beyond that, how does that come into praxis? These are big questions that are being tackled by this. And I think there's some helpful directions that it's pointing to. But I think it's still, there's just so much still totally unknown right now.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And you'd have thought that after 2,000 years, you'd have found our way by now, right? But we're still looking.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Chris, the thing that really resonated for me in the article was the outward focus area, because it's always seemed to me that congregations that have vitality about them, vital congregations, are those that are outward looking rather than inward looking. And I really think we need to pay close attention to congregations who are really taking mission seriously. Mission in the very broadest sense. Yes, evangelism is part of that, but also service of the world, care for creation, that kind of mission in the totality of what that can mean. It is just a key part of a vital congregation. So I really resonated with your outward focus aspect of the paper. Yeah.
Thank you. And Rob, you especially coming from the UK, being familiar with fresh expressions and all of that, I think that also dovetails well into what you just said. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of my ministry has been in, as I mentioned earlier, doing children's ministry, most of which can look like a fresh expression at some level. So when I was a parish priest, the largest single congregation that I ever had was the children's service that happened on a Thursday evening, which essentially was a fresh expression. So the Sunday congregation was fairly large, but I was able to stand up sometimes in the pulpit and remind people that actually this was the second largest congregation of the week. And that was good, and people took that well, and actually the reason that worked as a fresh expression was because people from across that Sunday congregation were very involved in making it work on a Thursday evening. It wasn't just me trying to do it. It was something that the whole congregation at some level were involved in.
Great, setting the stage for the questions to come. Thank you. Reverend Cho, any?
Yeah, so thanks so much for sending us this fascinating article. It's about reminding who we are as a Christian, and also reminding our golden rule, love God and love neighbors. Also, it is about how to use our lenses, looking forward and looking back, what happened, also to see ourselves and also to see what's going on in our society. So it reminds about using different lenses each time. Also at the same time, using all the lens together or separately. So it's a kind of good article. Thanks so much for sharing with us.
No, thank you. Yeah. Which leads me on to another question is, as you are, responsible, as you just said, for the formation of students in your own denominational capacity. I've got a question for you, and about your students that you're preparing for the future church. I mean, for a church that's looking very different from what it looked like 30 years ago, even 15 to 10 years ago, how do you think students should be prepared? And like Rebecca was saying, for this unknown that we're walking into, any thoughts, any ideas about? I'm sure you've been thinking about it, but I'm going to ask you.
It's something I think that we're probably all thinking about to some extent. I'm very aware in the west of Canada, in particular, how religion is often viewed in deeply negative terms by the surrounding society, which is a new thing in the last few decades. It's increasing. I think we need to pay more and more attention to those who say they are spiritual but not religious, and make more explicit connection in terms of spirituality with them. Which leads me to the slight pushback in the paper that you sent, which is when you talk about ritual. I absolutely agree with what you say in the paper about ritual being problematic if it's an end in itself, but actually ritual done really well could be a place of great connection with those who are seeking a spirituality. So there's something there about wanting to say actually this could be part of the answer as well, so long as it's not being done as an end in itself. It could be something useful, which could speak to people.
So ritual, I think, for example, the Eucharist itself, right?
Yeah, the Eucharist, which can be done in a very non-ritualistic way, but actually, I mean, if you go down to St. James's in the downtown east side here, there are people there who have just connected with the very high church, full smells and bells experience of it, who have come into the church through this particular very spiritual and whole body experience of the Eucharist. And interesting, that sort of feeds for that particular church, that feeds their outward looking focus on the ministry to all of the homeless people who are very prevalent as a population in the downtown east side.
Well, as you speak, I know of a couple who actually left the Pentecostal church and went back to an Anglican church because they like the liturgy and the rituals. And there's a sense of belonging. There's a sense of identity, right? When you do the same thing, everyone does the same thing together. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think of my camping ministry experience, there is that sense of belonging, and some of the young people say we always do it this way, and it feels like it can actually facilitate a worshipful experience once you understand the language of the activity. But I think Rob's point of paying attention to what are the new connectivity options for people? What is it that's already moving them? So like this Cascadia region that we're all in right now, besides you, Chris, the the connection with nature and the outdoors recreational healthy lifestyle kind of stuff of Vancouver, we call it Lotus Land, and it's the land of Lululemon and all that stuff. But we could denigrate that, or we could understand, the very first revelation of God as creator comes through nature. And so how is God out there ahead of us already connecting with people? And the different, some of us have a background in a Celtic spirituality, for example, and some of the treasures of that spirituality, spiritual practices, as you pointed out in your paper, can be great connecting points. I think BST's sort of tagline or motto, or thoughtful, engaged, and generous, when I think about those three words, those are goals for what we'd like to inculcate and evoke in our students. They're not ultra overly deterministic. They're open-ended, and to help students to come to congregational and other settings of ministry with that thoughtful, engaged, and generous approach helps with navigating the tumult, the unknown. So yeah, I think it's more about building up a toolkit and helping them to learn ways to reorganize and use their tools in new ways than they thought. That we can't tell them exactly, but yeah.
So it's more about, what I'm hearing you saying is it's more about equipping them for a future that might not be known, but giving them the tools and equipment. Yeah. And before Reverend Cho chimes in, I also sense that there is this tension between being anchored properly with rituals and all that, but also being free to explore and look at new things, right? So, yeah.
But
Mm,
I mean,
yes.
just to play with that metaphor a little further, right? Like if you've ever anchored a boat in a bay, um, it's gonna move around, right? The anchor point keeps it from floating out into the full waterway
Drifting.
where it will get hit by a cruise ship. Um, but like the anchor point is not a it's a safety measure and it's your
Mm,
center point.
mm,
But it does allow for the boat to go up and down with the tide. It allows for it to wander a safe boundary. So I do think that those anchor points are key. Um, we're not talking about free flowing, anything goes kind of stuff.
right.
In terms of people's spirituality, their spiritual practices, what does ritual mean? It needs to be grounded, it needs to have a good foundation. And that's the other thing that theological education provides for people is a really deep exploration so that they come out of their classes knowing why they believe what they believe
Mm,
and not just taking it for granted
mm.
as something that's been passed down to them.
That's a useful picture, yes. Hyuk, any comment?
So as I listen to Rebecca's great explanation on being a Christian, our Christians this time, uh, the image of a canoe or canoeing comes to my mind. So I'm a canoeist. So just imagine you are in a canoe or kayak and you're flowing into, or you are kind of paddling. And you have to see what's going on far ahead of us, or ahead of you. Or also you have to look at in front of you what's going on, if there is a debris or a branch or a rock, so that you can navigate
Mhm,
to find your path.
mhm,
So also when you are in kayak or canoe, centering is important. Without the centering yourself, your
right.
canoe or your kayak will tip over it. And then at the same time, you have to paddle, centering paddle and looking forward, also looking immediate what's going on in front of your kayak and then canoe. Also, if I continue Rebecca's uh, idea about the Celtic spirituality, I love to think about thin places. So heaven and earth meet together. There's no borderline between heaven and earth. It's kind of meet together. So this kind of image challenged me to how we live and uplift that kind of image in our life or in our education, which means church and the society and the school and our neighbor, how to meet together beyond the borderline so that we can experience God's presence like a Celtic themed places. That is a challenge, also that is opportunity for me.
Mm. Leads me to my next question actually about you mentioned the church in everywhere and church in all spaces and places. And so we believe, and I think we preach a lot about the priesthood of all believers, but in my experience, it's not lived out very well. For me, it's still 98% and 2% kind of divide. 2% being the clergy and the staff, and the 90% being the lay people. And there's more transactional agreement between both rather than a transformational one. So if we are being driven back to look at the priesthood of all believers and ministry of all, and the question I have is, how important is it to raise that awareness of the importance of the ministry of all, the vows we take at our baptism, and what do you have any comments about that, about the engagement of the laity and empowerment of the laity again? My mantra has been equipping, empowering, and mobilizing the laity. And for the church to get growing, that's what we need to do. But I'd like to hear your comments on that, and how do you think it can be played out in our churches, in our denominations?
Well, I sort of began answering that question when I talked about the fresh expression that
Yes.
was enabled because of everyone who was involved. Now, as the parish priest, I suppose I was the leader in a sense, although everyone was so involved that after it had been going for a while, I didn't have to worry if I was away
Right.
one particular week because I was able to plan with somebody else to be actually leading it that week.
So, Rob,
That
if I can stop you for a moment, what did it do to the people who were involved? What happened to them?
Yeah, well, I think they had a great sense of their own ministry in it. And some of them, as parish priests are, were sort of generalists and would do any part of it. Some of them were very comfortable only doing one particular aspect of it. There was one person, for example, we always finished with a meal. There was one person who didn't want to have any involvement with actually running the worship or anything around that, but came absolutely faithfully every week to wash up. And actually, that was vital because it was a ministry that was being done that needed to be done. So people had particular things they felt comfortable with or not, but they actually felt that they were, and they genuinely were, contributing to something which was beyond just turning up. They were actually giving back and looking out and contributing to the ministry of God, to where the Holy Spirit was doing things. But I think to get to that point, the thing that was absolutely vital was working with the congregation as a whole to do visioning for what that what that fresh expression was going to be.
Mhm.
So rather than me just imposing something, if I'd done that, I could have run something on my own, right? And it wouldn't have been as good, but I could have run it on my own. It would have been a kind of pared down version. But actually, by waiting a few months and trying to do visioning with as many people as wanted to be engaged, then everybody felt they had part of it and a buy-in to it. And so it was much easier to get people involved. Now, I've been to other churches where that just wasn't possible, and actually the congregation was so inward looking that they just didn't want to have anything to do with that. But where a congregation has that spark of outward lookingness, then actually it's really easy to harness if you just kind of start off by assuming that you as the parish priest don't have the answers, but that together we might be able to grow something. But it does need a spark of outward lookingness to do that, I think. It's really hard to do if that isn't there already in some way.
Right. Plus, also, I heard you saying that not just outward looking, but also a sense of using your own gifts that you have and bringing that to the
Absolutely.
table, right?
Yeah, and making people realize that they don't have to try and fit themselves into a way of being that really isn't true to them.
That's
That
right.
across a congregation, you'll have all sorts of skills and talents, which mean that the collective sum total gives you everything you need.
Right.
Not everybody has to do everything, and not everybody's expected to be equipped to do everything, but the sum total will be there in a congregation.
Mhm. Fantastic.
So if I learned something from democratic movement in Korea while I lived there, also participate in the process. So we try to make a progress or achievement or something. And if you wanted to make 10 steps, and one person can make 10 steps, but what I learned from the movement is that it is better 10 people can make one step than one person make 10 steps.
Mm-hmm.
So in that perspective, how can we share our vision, our ultimate vision and good news with our folks in our congregation? So congregants can make, even though slow, but one step at a time, eventually the movement will grow and grow and grow and make more steps rather than a priest or the minister can make 10 steps,
Mm-hmm.
then share with congregants and the congregants make little step. That is better for me.
I like that example. So you can picture it in your head, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's really
Thank you.
powerful.
Yeah.
I learned something important around this, the ministry that many people have that's outside of the congregation, that sometimes we don't see within the congregation. It maybe isn't feeding the number of people that show up on a Sunday morning. But I learned about this from a woman named Val, uh, elderly Irish, Scottish lady who actually said she was a lifelong Anglican. We had to be careful when she played the piano. She might just sneak in an Anglican tune. She'd be the only one who could sing it. Anyway, so Val inevitably came up on our every time we wanted to nominate new elders, Val's name would show up on the list. And I would dutifully approach her and say, the congregation recognizes you have gifts for eldership in the congregation. And she would say, but I have my care home ministry and a couple of other community focused ministries where she was sharing, doing devotionals, leading Bible studies out in the community. And not in the community we all lived in, not in the community where our church was, but in a community that she'd lived in previously, neighboring another town. So her work was almost totally unknown to the congregation beyond her close friends. And I said, well, tell me more about this. And this woman was busy. And we realized as a session of elders, we needed to bring Val in to talk about what she was already doing as a ministry and celebrate it. And she said, when I come to church on Sunday, I need this time so that I'm being nourished to go back out and go and do. And so we honored that more deeply. And that got me thinking, what are other people doing that I don't know about? I thought I knew Val fairly well. This is a couple of years into my ministry at that congregation. And so we started to, I even kind of charted, it was a small group of people. What are all the people doing? You have that time where we want to start this new program. We don't have enough people to help. And I started to look through my list of everyone who's associated with the congregation and what did I know they were already doing within and outside of that was bringing glory to Christ. I was hard pressed to find someone who was healthy and able and had time and wasn't already doing something else that was important, worthy Christian work. But as a congregation, we grew in acknowledging, celebrating, sharing the stories, inspiring each other. Can't say it brought more people into the church on Sunday.
So I've got two questions then that takes off. Thank you for sharing that. It's good to hear the examples. Two questions. One is, so what are the challenges that churches might face in becoming this kind of church where you are encouraging people to use their gifts? And it might not be inside the church, it might be outside the community. In fact, it has to be, I think. And that's one question. But then the second question is, if that happens, how different might our churches look and work and be the church? So if you can answer those two questions together, because I think they are tied, I'd love to hear your responses. So kind of what's stopping us? What are challenges that really prevent us from being this church that engages the entire body and lifts up the ministry of all? And if that happens, how different might we be as churches?
I guess I would question. I'm wondering if there's an underlying assumption there that our churches aren't growing because we're not outward focused enough. My experience is that that's not the case. They're not growing. The formerly mainline church, represented by three denominations here, is in decline. Perhaps that's not because we haven't been outwardly focused, but rather we're not sure how to grow, having let go of colonization and supremacy and coercion as our main tools for growth. We've let that go. We're starting to let that go. We're just barely starting to really let it go. And we're at a bit of a loss as to what happens next. But as someone who now I visit congregations on Sundays, filling in for ministers who are away and empty pulpits, the people who are there are doing amazing things. They are still doing amazing things. It's just there's an attractional issue. And I really question whether there's some magical program or even way of trying to transform the people who are currently part of churches. But rather it's we've been brought to our knees because we deserve it. And there's going to be a long repair. So, sorry, that's kind of down. I guess I just really question whether it is the case that we have congregations chock full of people who just aren't cutting it, and they need to change somehow. I don't know.
I suppose as I go around, and similarly to Rebecca, I visit lots of different churches, filling in for people, and sometimes just because I've been invited to preach. So I see quite a few different congregations. I think there are some Anglican congregations that are growing. Nothing in terms of revival, but a sort of slow growth. Most are declining. Similar story to that which Rebecca's sort of mentioned. I think those that are growing though have in some way been enabled to let go of their kind of imagined golden past, and actually there's been a lot of effort put in there to think about how we might do things differently, which may be about a congregation accepting that actually if you have kids around there will be a bit of disruption on a Sunday morning. There can be some really subtle things that can put people off if they're a young family coming into a church. And actually that can be something that's quite difficult to break. But those that are growing that I go to seem to have kind of got over that hurdle, and have let go of their kind of imagined pristine Sunday morning service, which of course was never quite true, but becomes something in the mind that is constructed and then becomes quite inward focused and all about me and my needs in church rather than about the needs of the world or the needs of a young family who walks through the door. If it's disrupting me, then it's a problem. Now, those that are shrinking probably haven't quite made that step yet. Maybe some of them have, but there may be other reasons they shrink. But certainly those that are growing that I go to have managed to do a lot of work to move beyond that imagined past.
So about 20 years ago, I heard this story. This is a true story where I was a minister in that area. So two churches decided to work together for, say, amalgamation. And they tried and tried and tried. Finally, they got together. But a year and two later, the church disappeared. And then people said to each other, I do not miss the church for, say, worship service, but they do miss fellowship. So this story can me think, what happened why they do not miss worship service, but they miss fellowship. So this story sometimes to think about, Michelangelo's creations, the painting, right? There's a God and a human being almost touched, but not touched. So is there any touching point or just kind of still waiting for the touching? What is missing in this story or what missed in that the ministry, also in the two churches? So there's no clear answer for this story. But what we need to do in my view, is that how to rekindle the mind of people to make a tangible connection with God. Also, sometimes, especially to my student, I introduce myself because I did congregational ministry over 20 years ago, 20 years, and I introduced myself. I have been is a congregational minister as a faith community builder. So my view on ministry is about the building faith community. So there's no clear answer how to do it. But in my view, is that to critical exegesis what happened 2,000 years ago and what's going on in our world, and to make tangible connections like Michelangelo's creation story, not almost touch, but touch. Then in my ministry, I observed something is going on, something is happening to become a clear intercultural church, to become an affirming church, to embrace various matters in our ministry.
No, thank you. I think that I like the illustrations, Reverend Cho. They're useful. But I'm wondering whether, I mean, like we all agree, there is no single solution as much as there is no single problem, right? These are complex issues that we're facing now. And I think it's good to remind ourselves that we can't plan ourselves through this. We have to discern our way through it. And discernment means a lot of humility, listening, and all those lovely things that we probably didn't do well before. In our arrogance and in our way of thinking, we got this nailed right. So, and we're not expecting answers either. We are just having a discussion. But before
Can I just add one thing to my
Sure.
previous comment,
Go ahead.
Chris?
Yeah.
And that is, I think I'd agree with Rebecca that even those churches that I go to where they are shrinking, actually they still have, many of them still have something of a ministry, particularly in this area with homeless people or something like that, or a food bank kind of ministry. I think one of the things I observe, though, with those churches is that it's a ministry that's been going on a long time and can end up being run fairly jealously by a few people who run it. And it came out of a really good vision some years ago, but actually it needs revitalizing. And just doing the same thing as was thought of 20 years ago may not be something that really makes it a vital, life-giving ministry anymore. And certainly not if it's only being run by the same people who have always run it, which inevitably means a slowly diminishing group. So even those places which can honestly talk about the external focused ministry that they have, if they're not throwing that ministry open to have others involved in it and to risk the changes that might mean, then actually I think there's still a problem with that. That actually congregations need to be encouraged to constantly be visioning, constantly be discerning what their ministries need to look like, in order to keep them vital and vibrant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rob, I think that's really helpful. I also wonder if part of what we're asking the same people to do over and over again, it kind of runs against the grain of like just natural development of human beings throughout their lifetime. So, if you've ever tried to break into a new friend group at an older stage of life, a lot of people in a new place, they have things set and they've got their cohort and they're traveling through life together and they just don't need you as the new person. So how can congregations, you know, I think like a person who of faith who's been serving the church and for decades and decades um, deserves a sort of to chill out and relax and have their little Christian cohort of people function in a comfortable way. I don't mean to disengage or never face challenge again, but what I have seen very wise, more elderly groups of people do in congregations is spawn the next generation. And I think, like Rob said, tolerating the young, noisy dishevelment of children in the lovely liturgy. But also, I know a congregation that had the old-fashioned kind of ladies' evening fellowship group, and they said, well, like what we do is not appealing to the younger women. How can we invite them to a dessert night and say, here's a pot of money to start you off on your own women's group or whatever kind of group, parents group, or some kind of a group that brings you connection and service. Um, and we'll do it together. Or I've heard of congregations that have allowed their building and their resources to be a site of replanting. So they've said we've kind of run our course for what we'd like to do, but our building is still good, and we have some resources. Come to a brand new iteration of congregational life, come and replant in our soil. And some of us will stick around and all of us give you our blessing and come and be among us, but do the new thing. But like we're not going to do the new thing, but we're going to cheer you on in our presence and partner with you as you do the new thing. I think that mindset might honor the extreme amount of energy and service that many elderly, faithful, longtime Christians have where they're at. They just, to ask them to be different now might be kind of cruel almost, but they're presented with some ways to support the next generation. I know that's a passion in many of their hearts, and they just don't really know how they could do it. I think that's a place of innovation we haven't explored further enough in the formerly mainline denominations.
Plus, also, I think the question, and I don't know if you answered it, but rhetorically asking, what makes the church unique in what they're doing? Because I've got lots of Buddhist and Hindu and Muslim friends who are doing absolutely equal, if not better work at the social side of it. But what makes it unique to the church? And I guess we all know the answer, but I just want to put that in there as well. Before you go, if you could advise, your upcoming generation of leaders in 2 sentences, what pithy advice would you give them as they are staring at an unknown future? They don't know which way the church is going, whether they're going to join declining denominations or not, and what's life-giving. How would you advise them? Just maybe 2 or 3 sentences, and then I'll let you go.
I would say hang tight to the stronghold of Christ. Pay attention to the context you're headed into, looking for your assumptions and your blind spots, and love the people. Love the people you're called to serve, love the people in the community. Help your congregation to understand, you're their minister out and about in the community as much as in the pulpit on Sunday. But to start with loving the people.
I like that. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah.
So to my student, I would like to say that you are a resident theologian. So you need to have creative thinking and then global mind.
Mm,
Also, you are the faith community builder,
mm.
and God will be with you and work with you as you venture into the future.
Nice.
Two things, I think. Keep Christ at the center of everything you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, try to get your congregation to a point where failure isn't the end, where you and they together have permission to try things
Right.
and actually not to worry if it doesn't quite work how you thought it would, but then not to rush, to be able to step back and take time to think about how that might be revisioned, what bits worked, what didn't. Actually, to take time, not just to rush at everything, find something didn't work and throw it away. Actually, to spend time with all of your creativity, looking at the possibilities of the new, keeping Christ at the center.
I love that. I actually might take all of that together and make something from that because it's really good advice. Because we live in a evolving environment which needs adaptive leadership, and adaptive leadership is experimenting, piloting, right? Trying new things out and learning from them. So that's great. Thank you very much. Oh, it's been so good to spend time with you, at least online.